Hi, my name's Robin Werner, and I will be presenting on John Dewey and the Progressive Error. Before we get started, this is just the table of contents of what will be covered in this presentation. The Progressive Era was marked by many changes and many events. One being World War One, when the United States entered World War One in 1917. That was the beginning of a growing economy, um, a more nationalistic value approach, and also increased regulations from the government. And an example of those regulations would be child labor reform and child labor laws. These laws were developed to protect children that were working 12 to 14 hours a day in factories and in many workplaces in rather inhumane conditions post industrial era. And this was a time period marked by change and recognizing needs for humans, and one of them being that children needed to be in school. Another highlight to this era was looking at women's rights because the men were primarily at war. Women were needed in the workforce, and with that, this leveraged their right to vote and have a different role in society. More educational shifts specific at this time are that schools were becoming more standardized. There were more standard practices to education, meaning that there was an expansion of public education access, and in some cases, even compulsory laws for children to go to school. Education was viewed as a tool for reform, and in order to make change, reformists felt that individuals needed to have an adequate education. Um, a lot of the initiatives for access were also in looking at specific areas like urban areas where many children were working. Also, looking at what the curriculum was. This was a shift to more practical curriculum that also allowed for democratic citizenship values to be in place so that children were being exposed to curriculum that prepared them for jobs such as vocational education and also to be productive citizens in a more student centered approach. John Dewey is a world-renowned educational and social philosopher who was born in 1859. He has degrees from the University of Vermont and Johns Hopkins University. And although he did teach elementary and secondary for a short period of time, he spent the majority of his educational career teaching at the college level at the University of Michigan and University of Chicago. His work, his hundreds of texts and articles and journals is still used and cited in today's work in education and philosophy. More about Dewey's philosophy of education. He felt that students needed to learn in a pragmatic environment where they were problem solving, experiencing hands on learning, that there were embodied practices. Movement was valued. As you can see in the pictures here, there is dialogue. There's more flexibility to the classroom. It's not the traditional rows of seats. He believed that there was a natural intersection between nature and experience, and that they were not to be siloed, that that was how students learn best, and that we needed to focus more on the well being of children, which aligns to Maslow's hierarchy that um, in order for children to learn, they have to have their needs met first. And it was important that students were in classrooms that valued safety and nurturing in order to learn. And finally, schools should foster a pluralistic democracy, and he felt that they were a microcosm to these environments where students learn to value different perspectives and how to work with one another and have um, dialogue with one another that was constructive. One of his most famous developments was the laboratory. And this was a school that was developed at the University of Chicago in 1896. And it really gave him the opportunity to put his work to test. He was able to create a school that taught children as young as 3 up until 12th grade so that they had a more unified schooling experience. The lab still exists today at the University of Chicago, but it's divided into 2 campuses, which have schools for specific grade levels, such as primary and secondary education. And one thing I wanted to note is that the high school offers over 150 classes and 40 extracurriculars, which I found interesting, and also aligning with Dewey's values that students have opportunities for experiential learning. And by giving them more um, different options, this can increase their opportunity to have that experiential learning opportunity. And moving on to Dewey's critics. So his work was, although it's still used today, there were critics of his beliefs and his theories and ideology. More notably, looking from the conservative traditionalist lens, the educator William Bagley was concerned that by not having traditional classroom values, that students would not have the same rigor and discipline that they had in a traditional classroom. Also, religious leaders feared secularism would exist and that we would lose Christian values in Dewey's classrooms. Specifically, Reinhold Niebuhr was concerned that Dewey was too optimistic of humans and that we needed to be more realistic of the sinful nature of humans. And finally, I wanted to end this on Dewey's impact today. He was an influential figure in progressive education, which is still seen today. We value interdisciplinary curriculum, student dialogue, and student centered practices in today's classrooms, as you can see in the pictures to the left. We value students being able to have productive struggle and problem solve. And we even evaluate teachers with some of Dewey's main points in today's model, such as the Charlotte Danielson model. And I highlighted this because this is a model that we use in our school district. And where I found parallels to Dewey's work was viewing the student, or excuse me, the teacher as a facilitator in their role and not them providing the stand and deliver approach to education. Also, having data driven practices on individual students and classrooms that are engaging, fostering hands on learning, and provide a safe and nurturing environment. These are all things that we still value in education today, that are still researched in education and aligned to Dewey's work. So, although his work is over a century old, it lives on in education today. Thank you for listening.